The greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another.
Every single token, because really in the United States, this is kind of a shocking point, I think. In the United States, there are two cryptocurrencies with regulatory clarity: Bitcoin and XRP. And XRP only has it because we fought that fight.
Bitcoin as well as XRP are the only crypto assets with clarity. But that doesn't necessarily mean much, considering that Bitcoin has had clarity, yet the regulators, the FCC in particular, has tried to push Bitcoin into a box where they could regulate it. Each regulator is trying to get as much jurisdiction as possible, and the SEC seems to have their crosshairs on the crypto market. Well, things are starting to change. The Trump administration has vowed to fire Gary Gensler and put a new head in the SEC, but we don't necessarily know that the new SEC head will be any better than Gary Gensler. If you recall, Gary Gensler was supposed to be an improvement of Jay Clayton, but the reality was Gary Gensler was far worse than Jay Clayton could ever be. Whoever takes over as the SEC head, we're going to have to watch their actions very closely, because it wasn't until a few weeks into the job where we started to notice that Gary Gensler was not the person that people thought he would be.
It's kind of madness to think we're going to go and litigate every single one based upon use case, based upon, what have you. And so the criticality of, frankly, even events like this where government and private are coming together, but you are seeing movement in at the federal level. There's something passed the House called FIT 21 Act, which I think is constructive. It may be in the final chapters of the lame duck. We'll see something happen in the Senate side. But I think for both Chris and I, it certainly was a very interesting and a challenging experience to get distracted in building this payments-centric view of where we think the world's going around infrastructure, to be distracted by this. The last thing I'll say about it, and I'm sure Chris has other things to add, it's our business outside the United States has gone very, very well. 95+% of our customers are non-US. And since the SEC lawsuit, 75% of our hiring has been non-US. And what a sad state of reality that a US company has, that is, actually delivering real use cases around these technologies that, basically can't sell into the US market even now, because US companies are like, well, the SEC is appealing. And, they don't understand exactly what the SEC is appealing, but it's a reason to say, no, we don't want to fight that fight right now. We'll wait and see what happens. And what a sad state of reality that a U.S. company has, that is, actually delivering real use cases around these technologies that, basically can't sell into the U.S. market even now, because U.S. companies are like, well, the SEC is appealing. And, they don't understand exactly what the SEC is appealing, but it's a reason to say, no, we don't want to fight that fight right now. We'll wait and see what happens.
I'm not very happy about this. I found this information and I feel it as a duty to present people with truth. And Garlinghouse said, even though the Judge Torres said XRP is not a security, they're still having issues with selling it to US-based companies or banks, that XRP is not a security, and they want a resolution to the SEC case before anyone proceeds.
I'm going to go focus on this piece or that piece. The other thing, and we talked about this a little bit, I do think that the industry that I know I'm representing up here sometimes is doing itself no favors by advocating for things that enable anonymous transactions. And, my view has always been the only way these technologies scale is to make sure they are first and foremost, and Ripple for sure has always been on the front foot around how do we make sure compliance is first. But, you read things that's, okay, DeFi and the enablement of non-KYC transactions, our view has always been, okay, that's dead on arrival. That's not going to work. We need to make sure that the core pieces here meet with basic standards of government regulation, because governments aren't going to go away. We actually had Ben Bernanke speak at one of our conferences, Swell, years ago. And I remember one of the things he said is, the idea that governments are going to give up control of things like KYC and their money supply, they will roll tanks into the street before they allow that. That was his quote. I remember thinking, I remember thinking it was kind of profound. I mean, he's obviously a very interesting, smart guy, but I remember thinking like, yeah, they probably would roll the tanks into the street before they'd let go of that.
I found this funny because the vast majority of transactions within the banking industry are actually private. You have no idea where I'm sending money or what bill I'm paying. Most of my transactions, if not all of my transactions, are private. Now, every once in a while, you may have a KYC officer looking at the transactions to make sure that I'm not a terrorist or a money launderer. Ben Bernanke said that we would actually roll tanks in the street to protect our power. Now, when you look at the BRICS coalition, Brazil, Russia, India, China, the list goes on, is now open to 45 plus applicants. Their entire goal from the get-go was to get away from the dollar system because of sanctions. They're actually pushing to move to other means. And this is why gold has been pumping. This is why Bitcoin has been pumping. Their central banks are loading up on these assets. You may recall that Ripple was actually working with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority for their CBDC design. Ripple was trying to create a real estate title insurance type of platform. And I bring this up because recently Flare announced that they are working with decentralized KYC with Red Date Technology. If you don't know who Red Date Technology is, it's one of China's national champions. You see, they created the BSN network. China's CBDC is vast, and they have this cloud infrastructure called the BSN network. And the BSN network is very similar to Microsoft Azure or AWS, and is basically a way to plug and play different blockchains. So
my exposure to finance was really post the large financial crisis. The ideas around what something is worth fall apart when currency is printed. People were making trades based on an expectation of government action rather than based on any fundamental strength in the economy. The sort of large excess of capital that was put into the markets post the GFC really led to a position where valuations were massively out of whack. And so when you spend your days thinking about the idea of taking the fundamental thing that values assets, it's a very interesting thing because it removes that ability of a group of people to pervert essentially the entire transmission mechanisms of all financial markets. And that's what has happened. The idea that there could be a technology that removes that from the equation is very, very appealing.
The 2008 financial crisis revealed to the world that counterparties are at the heart of this system. The banking system relies on trust. And if you cannot trust a counterparty, then you cannot trust the assets that you hold. And when Hugo says that blockchains are an evolution of the 2008 financial crisis, what he is getting at is these are protocols that do not require counterparties. They could require counterparties, but for the most part, the whole spirit of this technology is to rid the system of counterparties. And we are seeing this firsthand. We are seeing a movement from the ground up to rid the system of counterparties.
Business that we're in, it's a B2B business, and how our business partners interact with their own users, whether they happen to be yet another business or potentially retail, is entirely based on how their business model is run. But ours is a B2B format. So this notion of having AML and KYC that are being obligated based on the institutional partners that we're working with, and the flow can be demonstrated using innovative technology such as this, becomes a proof point that if the technology is feasible, then we need to make sure that from a compliance and regulatory perspective is also followed, and thereby then we can really open up a very large market that all of us can participate into.
Flare partnered with Red Date Technology to introduce a never-before-seen decentralized identity, KYC, or Know Your Customer initiative for mainland Chinese visitors in Hong Kong. And this is very interesting considering that Hong Kong is a financial capital of the world, as well as Red Date Technology is the technology provider that created the BSN network, which is the blockchain services network and works very closely with China's CBDC. Now, the BSN network is very similar to Microsoft Azure or AWS, except for it's very specific for blockchains and for an interaction with China's CBDC. China does not allow technology providers to work directly with China's CBDC. There's a layer, and that layer is the BSN network. So Flare plus Red Date with Real DID, which stands for Decentralized ID, will meet the KYC compliance while maintaining users' anonymity alongside ZK-based anonymity. In other words, once legislation is enacted and production systems are in place, mainland Chinese visitors in Hong Kong would be able to use digital financial services without needing to expose personal identity information. We've seen over the years that China has this schizophrenic view with crypto. One minute it's okay, the next minute it's punishable by death, and it keeps going back and forth. But it's important to note that there's 1.4 billion people in China. It's estimated that the average net worth is 2.8 million yuan, which is equivalent to about $400,000 for an average urban household.
So I again, I just want to kind of double emphasize that this is a technology trial to showcase what is the art of the possible. Now, the interesting thing though is that once the technology infrastructure have been put in place, then the opportunity can then be quite boundless. As we know, the Hong Kong government over the last 2.5 years now have been actively promoting that Hong Kong as a digital asset hub with various different regulation, both in terms of the virtual asset trading platforms as well as the stablecoin that will be hopefully finalized in the coming future. So the goal is then to be able to enable much more tokenized financial product, especially given the number of different examples that have been done over the last 18 to 24 months. So the opportunity here is to showcase that one, a decentralized identity solution that works very closely with the Chinese kind of registrar, or the I think it's called the Ministry of Public Security Services is in place. Yeah. Public security, thank you, is in place. But at the same time, it is then be able to connect with regulated entities in Hong Kong who are offering these tokenized financial products to have an opportunity to connect under that guardrails, well, from a compliance and AML KYC perspective. So it's a very important first step, again, to showcase the technical feasibility of how this can be done. And then obviously from that point on, then, following the regulatory development and also following the continuous development from the Hong Kong government perspective, will then yield a lot more opportunity for all of us to explore in a compliant manner.
Yeah. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority's digital asset hub is focused on things like stable coins, green bonds, CBDCs. The list goes on and on. There's an array of different technologies, centralized, decentralized, some that aren't even financial applications. So it's a must to have data that is authentic, data that can be validated, data that is true. Most chains do not incorporate for the data mechanism. They outsource this to an oracle like Chainlink or API3, something to that nature, to try to bring data on chain. Now the issue with that is, first of all, there could be a lot of security issues because it's not embedded on chain. Anything that you have on the layer 1 will automatically make it more secure. So the fact that a lot of these chains are tapping into pricing features makes them more susceptible to hacks and malicious attacks. So why is data such a big deal? Well, imagine Imagine if you were able to convince everybody that Bitcoin costs $20, but it's really trading for $100,000. And you're able to convince everybody it's trading for $100, and you're able to buy hundreds of Bitcoin for $100. Well, you would be able to cheat the system.
Yep. So we partnered with Red Date, for this trial, and just to kind of set the scene of the trial. Essentially, a stable coin was issued on Flare, an IDA-based stable coin, to an individual using the Red Date Real DID connection. So the system allowed for the stable coin to be issued, but only once the Real DID system had approved that the person was who they say they are, and then that stablecoin went on to be used to purchase a tokenized financial product. So that was the test that happened on Flare. And I think, from our perspective, there's, as Yifan said, there's 50 million visitors from mainland China to Hong Kong per year. Between Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Macau, there's 77 million visitors, and globally, there's about 101 million trips out of China, at least in 2023. That's come down a bit since COVID, but creeping back up. And so for us and for Flare, the opportunity to partner with Red Date and to work with IDA with regards to these regulated stablecoins, it's a huge angle for us to be able to get people from mainland China into the crypto ecosystem through Flare.
Yeah, and just
the Hong Kong Monetary Authority is one of the more forward-leaning central banks, and this is under the directive of the BIS and the BIS Innovation Hub. And with the decentralized KYC element, you're going to have mainland China customers flow into the Flare network, and they don't necessarily have to even leave Flare, because you have things like the F assets that are collateralized with Spark token, Flare token, and they're over collateralized. So you need 1.5. So if Bitcoin trading at 100K, you need $150,000 worth of Flare to back the Bitcoin that's on the Flare networks. So these are huge supply demand imbalances, especially considering that China has a vast amount of population.
People started using Bitcoin in places like Venezuela to hedge out insane inflation that was collapsing their currency. Crypto broadly has solved the question of how can I move dollars across the world really quickly and easily without having to enter an IBAN. The DeFi that is built fundamentally around essentially a dollar-based stablecoin system and native tokens, because that's essentially what DeFi is. And I think that could expand as people use crypto tokens more, whether it be stablecoins or the native. So if we're lucky, Flare will be one of the key components in how people use data on blockchains. That's what we're building. That's essentially where we're going. We're not a smart contract project focused on Ripple. We have a much, much larger ambition, and that ambition revolves around data and off-chain compute.
The greatest revolution of our generation is this discovery that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. The greatest revolution of our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you enjoy content like this, please consider joining my Ghost site or my Patreon, dmjr.ghost.io or patreon.com/fame21more.